Hey guys, welcome back. My name's Sanne van Look and today I want to talk to you guys about gear and a lots of it. I want to talk to you guys through my journey on GAS, the gear acquisition syndrome, and how I've been evolving the last, let's say, 8 years on getting to lighter and a lot cheaper gear. So let's have a look at the gear that I'm evolving away from. All right, well, here we have all the lenses that at some points I was taking to a wedding or when I was going to a shoot and I had like half of a briefing. This would be the gear that I would bring. So this would be a 1424 2.8, the Sigma 24 1.4, the Sigma 35 1.4, the Sigma 50 1.4, the 85 Nikon 1.4, the Nikon Macro 105, the Sigma, what is this one? The 135 f2 manual, and the 70-200. Okay, for the record, this gear is not all mine. I do not own all this. I wish I did, but unfortunately, I don't. So I did a quick calculation on the price of these 8 lenses, and combined they are like, let's say, somewhere between 9,000 and 10,000 euros. And it's just not comfortable walking around, like let's say on a wedding where you're carrying around these lenses all day, and you have the evening party and you have to put your bag somewhere in a corner. So I'm never comfortable about having that much gear with me at all times. For those who know me already, they know that I'm a prime guy. I love prime lenses and I really do not like zoom lenses. I don't like the way zoom lenses feel. I don't like the way they render an image. They're usually not as sharp. They're by far not as fun to use as some of the cooler primes. Today we're not going to be focusing per se on these lenses, but on which lenses I am using to replace every single one of these and making my bag a lot lighter and a lot cheaper. So next up, let's grab the vintage lens setup. Now, that's more like it. So here we are looking at the ultimate vintage prime lens setup. So in this lineup, I'm going to show you guys what we have from my left to my right. And let's start with the Pentax Super Takumar 17mm. Next up, 24mm, the Sigma Super Wide 2.8, the Sigma Mini Wide 28mm 2.8, the Pentax Super Takumar 35mm f2, the Pentax Super Takumar 50mm 1.4, the Minolta MD Rockor 58mm 1.2, the Pentax Super Takumar 85mm 1.9, then the Nikon 105 f2.5, the lens Steve McCurry shot, the Afghan girl with, and next the beer can, which is the Pentax Super Takumar 135 f2.5 also. So for those paying attention, we added one lens to the lineup, which is a 28mm. We didn't have a 28mm in the Pro setup. So I added up the price I paid for these 9 lenses, and altogether I paid somewhere between 900 euros and 1,000 euros, which is 1/10 of the set you were previously looking at. And luckily, I do own all of these beautiful, beautiful pieces of glass. It did take me approximately 8 years to find a good deal on all of these lenses and to find the ones I really love and like. And of course, 100 billion hours of doing research and reading on the lenses and reading reviews. So that all being said, let's have a look at which one of these vintage lenses is replacing which one of the other modern digital lenses. So let's switch the gear again. Super wide angles. We have the Nikon 14 to 24 f2.8 versus the Pentax Super Takumar 17mm f4, I believe. So every time I was bringing this lens along to a shoot, I noticed at the end of the day I had maybe like 5 images I took on this lens. And if you look at this lens element, it's huge. It weighs a kilo, 1.7 or 1.5 kilograms. It's ginormous, it's fragile. It is great, but for those 5 images on, let's say, a wedding or a reportage, you know, it's just not worth carrying this lens along when you have so much other gear, or maybe lighting and flashes and all the other stuff you want to bring. So put these two next to each other, you can just see that this one is almost as big as the lens cap of the Nikon. And optically, it's super cool, it's super sharp, and it has a lot of character. So I would almost even just prefer this one over the Nikon. Then we have the Sigma Art 24 1.4, which I replaced by the Sigma Super Wide 24mm. This one is, well, obviously much smaller. It's tack sharp. It focuses, I think, about like 7 centimeters closer than the 24mm, which already focuses pretty close. So this one goes down to like 17 centimeters close focus, which is super cool for getting macro shots. So this one is just really versatile and fun to shoot. Then we have the 28mm lens. I'm using this lens together with the 24. So this is the Pentax 28mm mini wide. Also like almost macro lens, focuses really close, super sharp. And I'm using these two lenses together to shoot most of my videos lately. So these two have like very similar colors, they blend really well together, so I don't have to worry about that in post-production too much. And these two together, they weigh quite a bit less than the Sigma. And let's grab some 35mm. We have the Sigma Art 35mm 1.4 versus the Pentax Super Takumar 35mm f2. Both are really fun lenses, both are really sharp, though the 35mm f2 from the Takumar. The Takumar, you do have to stop down a bit to get like comparable sharpness to the Sigma, but it does do that. A quirk about the Super Takumar, it's kind of yellowish, but you know. Next one, we have the 50mm. The Sigma Art 50 I do own. It was my first pro digital lenses. And I have like a real love-hate relationship with most of these Sigma lenses because they have amazing contrasts, but it's really rough. So all the blacks are really black, the whites are really white, and there's like the in-between is sometimes hard to save. And when you compare it to like a lens like the Super Takumar 50, you really notice that you have like much better micro contrast. And it's much easier to save all the midtones. So it almost feels like the Super Takumar will give you an advantage in color depth and in dynamic range, which is really cool. Fun fact about the Takumar, this rear element is bohrium. See if you can have a look at that. I don't know if you can see how yellow the shine is on this one. Maybe I can show it there. The bohrium in the glass is actually radioactive. And the guy I bought it from, he kept it in a box just to be sure he didn't get sick from this lens, but I don't think it's harmful. Next one up was the Minolta Rokkor 58mm 1.2, which is actually quite a bit smaller and lighter than the Sigma. This is the 50, still the 51. This is still the 50 1.4, which you can see is massive. This is 1.2, so actually this one lets in more light. Looking at the Sigma 50mm side by side with the Minolta Rokkor, it's interesting because the Rokkor has a more shallow depth of field, it has a better light transmission, and it's quite a bit smaller. And the images you get from this one are really unique. At 1.2, it is kind of soft, but for portraiture, if you want to have like the softer look, it gives you a lot less effort in skin retouching, and it's just really fun. So then we have the 85mm. The Nikon 1.4, it's really cool. Unfortunately, this lens is also not mine. I do love shooting it. It has like really good autofocus, but I think it sells for like 1,650 euros. and I bought this one for 80 euros. So that's 1/20th of the price. And this one is also really awesome. It has a lot better character to it. It's not as sharp as the Nikon, but for 80 euros, stop it down to f2.2 and it's basically as sharp as the other one is. Next up, 105. Here we have the Sigma 105mm macro. It's a 2.8. This lens is really great for shooting the close-ups, the flowers, the bouquet, a ring at a wedding, and just doing like macro shots of insects and whatever. So the 105 Sigma, the macro lens, it's really sharp. It's good, but the images are just pretty clinical looking. So on the one side, it's really sharp, but images are pretty dull, I guess. But it's so sharp that you have to end up retouching every pore of somebody's face. Compare that to the Nikon 105. This lens is just pure magic. The 3D pop you get from this one, it's insane. The subject just separates from the background like crazy, and it has superb micro contrast and contrast, and it's just amazing to use. The focus ring is awesome, and also the color rendition is just absolutely beautiful. And the last one we're going to be comparing is the Samyang 135 f2 versus the 135mm Super Takumar f2.5. Now here, both of these lenses are absolutely insane. I don't know if you can see that. And in this case, I simply love both of these lenses. The Samyang, it's, I guess, one of the sharpest lenses I have. Stop it down a bit and this thing is just crazy. But it's still kind of big, it's pretty heavy. Pretty big and heavy, but the size difference isn't too significant anymore. Okay, so we took a look on how all these vintage lenses are approximately like 1/4 of the size and weight and 1/10 of the price. And for the way I use them, actually, I like a lot of these vintage lenses a lot better. So let's talk about why exactly I often prefer the vintage lenses. So the first thing that I really love about vintage lenses is just the magic. They render an image in a completely different way. So what we're gonna see is some of the quirks and some of the flaws that are actually gonna make an image more unique. If you would compare it to modern digital lenses, you're gonna see they are clinically sharp from edge to edge. Each and every one of these vintage lenses, they have different coatings. Lenses has like a different construction. They often don't have the aspherical lens elements, which makes for color fringing. They have a lower element count, which to some believers is beneficial. I'm pretty neutral on that one, but they do, no matter what, give you a more unique image. If we're looking at the Super Takumars, they have radioactive rare elements, which gives them a yellow glow. If we're looking at the Minolta, which I'm holding right here, it has like the most buttery backgrounds that you've ever seen. Another big difference between vintage lenses and modern digital is the way they handle light, how they handle flares. If you're shooting a sunset, you can see like huge differences between how clinical a modern lens would look and how the vintage ones, depending which ones, you can create like really magical stuff with that. A very critical difference for myself is the focus throw. So if we have a look even at this Rockcore, we have a focus throw of about, like, let's say 180 degrees. Some of the Takumars are like 280 degrees. And let's grab a Sigma and we can see that we barely have 90 degrees. Yeah, so we don't even have 90 degrees of focus throw. So if you're manual focusing at 1.4, you have almost zero control. So if you're using vintage lenses with a longer focus throw, you can focus so much more accurately. Not only is the focus throw on these vintage lenses usually much longer, but they're also dampened. And it just gives you like a much more tactical feel of what you're doing. And when you're turning it, you can really turn like even 1/4 of a millimeter and it'll be smooth. While on most of the modern lenses, it's just not smooth. If you go to like the expensive Zeiss or Leica, yeah, they are, but who has that kind of cash for building a lens setup, let's say 10 lenses? That's, well, not for my wallet. Next important part is which lenses are you gonna use and which camera are you gonna stick them on. So to mount all these vintage lenses, I do have some adapters. I have the M42, I have the Minolta MD and the Nikon FTZ. And then you have to consider what camera are you going to be putting these lenses on. Because there's a huge difference in how different modern cameras will deal with these lenses. And in particularly, the wide angle lenses will look very different on different camera brands. And the main reason in this is the sensor stack. So if we were to take the 17mm wide angle and put that on a Sony body, we'd see that the edges would be really smeared. And the reason behind that is the sensor stack of the Sony. It's a really thick sensor stack, so the light it'll come in too angled and won't hit the sensor in the correct way, and it'll give like a really smushy image. Very cool fact is the Nikon Z6 and Z7, they have a much thinner sensor stack, and they will deal with these vintage lenses in a much better way. The reason behind this is these vintage lenses, they were designed to shoot directly onto film, so there wouldn't be any glass in between. And now these digital bodies, they all have like the protective glass in front, and it's exactly that piece of glass that is pretty thick on a Sony is causing the problems, which luckily for myself, Nikon does do a lot better. So places where you can find these lenses secondhand, that would be the secondhand websites. Here in Belgium, we have marktplaats.nl and tweedehands.be. For myself, I think I found half of my lenses traveling through Eastern Europe and finding them in pawn shops there or stuck on cameras on flea markets. And I found like a few beautiful ones there. For those of you who do not have vintage glass yet, but want to embark in this crazy adventure of gas and joy, I'd suggest going for the Helios 44M2 or 44M4, which is a swirly bokeh little gem. So I have two of them, one of which I actually took off the coatings for more flare, and I bought one for €1 somewhere at once, so you can find them really cheap. So that all being said, the idea is that this video is going to be the kickoff of a series where we are going to take one of the vintage lenses, like let's say the Super Takumar 50mm 1.4, and we're going to compare it outdoors, doing a shoot, comparing it to its modern digital brother and seeing which lens is better for what. And I think that's going to be a whole series, and I think it's going to be a whole lot of fun. So if you like this video or learned something, just please hit the like and the subscribe button down there. And I hope to see you next week in the video where we're going to head out with one of these lenses and start shooting. See you in the next vid. Peace out.